Okay, let's start from the beginning. I'm going to move your handsome faces over to the side of my screen. So the first presentation is mine, and it's on cooling urban heat islands with trees. And this isn't the most important topic of the day, but it leads in me as moderator just to to be here for the first talk. That's the only reason I thought it would save time. So there's a lot in the news these days about urban heat islands. There's also a lot in the news these days about overwatering, about water waste, about the drought. What can we do? How can we keep our trees healthy and happy? How can we ensure that they help abate these hotter and hotter urban heat island conditions? So first point, and I hope that the way I'm presenting this is the way that you feel comfortable presenting it to the public, because it's all about you being, if you will, really the scientist here and finding a way to convey this research-based objective information to the public. So I think what's important that they know, first and foremost, is that living plants cool the environment. During the process of photosynthesis, transpirationally, they're actually cooling the environment by the water cycle and the water that is taken up in the roots coming back into the stem, and then through transpiration evaporating out of the plant's leaves. And then it vaporizes. So during that process of transpiration, the air temperature around those plants is significantly cooler than impervious surfaces. So that's point number one. We have natural air conditioning, and it's from all living plants. Some do a better job of it. And one point that I know that Amir is going to be making, so I'll just sort of open the door, a toehold on this point, is that there's also a balance in making sure we're supplying enough water to our ground covers, turf and trees, in the case of my research, but realizing that unless those plants have at the optimum level the water that they need to grow healthfully, then their environments are hotter. Their surface environments are hotter if they're under irrigated. So this is all a game of it's almost a shell game and a game of checks and balances. The other take-home message that I think is imperative that we make sure that we inform our city managers, planners, mayors, any group that you're also affiliated with, are the benefits of urban trees. So besides significantly cooling urban heat islands, they actually save energy and they reduce related costs, whether it's parking under the shade of a car, whether it's having a well-placed tree that is deciduous, so it allows sun into the home in the winter, but in the summer, it's actually providing shade. Trees absorb carbon dioxide. It's an ecosystem benefit that greatly is enhanced as trees age. So trees that are recently planted don't offer this ability to absorb carbon dioxide and store it in the wood, including the root wood, as much when they're young as when they're mature. So every time that we mistreat a tree, then if you've taken any econ classes and heard the term opportunity cost, you lose that tree and have to start all over again. So the benefits that 30, 40, 50, or perhaps an 80-year-old majestic oak or maple tree have are gone just because of human error. So it's so important that during drought, water restrictions, and not during drought and water restrictions, that trees are first in our landscape. They also help remove dust and absorb pollutants. They are a buffer of noise, and of course they provide habitat for animals, microorganisms. A lot of work being done on the improvement of mental and emotional health, just from being in a park or enjoying our backyard. Plants reduce glare and reflection. A lot of work about trees' ability to capture runoff and stormwater flooding, and even during a drought. With climate change, we can have weird weather, which includes from time to time flooding as well as droughts. And of course, we don't want to ignore the windbreak potential of our trees. So this is vitally important that under drought and water restriction that the trees come first. So yes, we have a moisture drought. We also have a tree drought. It's pretty dismal, but it's true that sure, we still have about 9 million street trees in California, but since 1988, their density has decreased 30%. So just in about 33 years. California cities now have the lowest tree canopy per capita in the United States. So we need to work with the cities. That's a role that Donna and Amir and I have. Your role to work with the public and the nonprofits, neighborhood by neighborhood, get these trees in the ground. So I'm going to show you some examples of what these heat islands look like and the potential for trees to help abate those situations. On the left is the latest drought monitor map. So that's from last Thursday. Each Thursday, there's a new one that replaces the previous week's. But as I mentioned before, 96% of the state is now suffering either severe or extreme drought. So to put that in perspective, if you look at over the last 3 months, and you look at the red where it says D3, that's exceptional drought. Currently, about 60% of the state is under exceptional drought, whereas 3 months ago, it was 1.39. So things are not moving in the direction that that would illustrate that we're anywhere near needing to deal with the drought and further water restrictions, which the governor just this morning indicated that he may impose. So trees significantly cool urban heat islands. I did a study last May and June, so that wasn't even in the heat of the July and August part of the summer, but I was just astounded. I used an infrared thermometer, you can see there on the left, but I found that surface temperatures of unshaded asphalt could be greater than 60 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than shaded asphalt during late spring and early summer in inland and desert cities. So yes, it's out in Palm Springs, but also it was in Redlands. So any of you that live along the coast are a little luckier, but all of you are master gardeners in 4 large urban counties that are impacted by urban heat islands. You don't need to go more than about 5 miles inland from the coast until you're getting conditions where anytime you reach an ambient temperature of 100 degrees or higher, you can have these urban heat islands with asphalt superheating 40 to 50 degrees higher than the ambient temperature. So 100 degrees in Anaheim could elicit an asphalt temperature of 140 or 145 degrees. So these are pictures from my data. I have the Celsius, but it's probably more familiar to concentrate on the Fahrenheit. So the picture on the left is unshaded black asphalt. It's about 166 degrees. Synthetic turf, extremely hot. It might be okay along the coast, but it's not living, it's not transpiring, and it's really superheating our inland and desert cities. So it was almost as hot as the black asphalt at about 163 degrees. The concrete, which in this picture looks dark, but it wasn't, it was a light gray. It was a little cooler at 160, and living turf, which was about 100 degrees. So, you know, let's pull in the reins and back up. Let's rethink, should we just rip out all of our turf, or those that have a warm season grass that's relatively drought tolerant, maybe just spike up the efficiency of our irrigation? And also look at ground covers. Don's work, Amir's going to be talking about those. What about ground covers that are drought efficient, that cover large swaths of our urban landscapes and cool the environment? That's an option over turf as well. The other thing that's becoming really popular are dyed black, chunky kinds of mulches. These were also about 166 degrees. This is a house down the street from me. Well-intentioned people, you can't really see it, but on the inside of their white fence, it's all black mulch as it is by that gate, and also on the left, their whole side and backyard is also black mulch. So They look like they're concerned about the eco footprint. They've got solar panels, but very, very dark conditions. Pet paws can burn in 60 seconds on 140-degree surface and 30 seconds on 160-degree surface. This is an actual picture. My cell phone turned off. That was an actual picture that I clicked a screenshot of my cell phone when I was taking a picture of our data plot that was synthetic turf. My camera turned off because of high temperature. So as master gardeners, one of the things that I think is really, really important to keep in mind are that vulnerable communities, low wealth communities tend to have more and higher temperature urban centers. They not necessarily have the dollars that come in for property taxes to afford a city arborist or a city forester. And these are the situations in which you and master gardeners can help get these trees in the ground. There's a lot of entities that are supplying trees. I have a talk later today on our recommended trees from our study. But again, pull the reins in. Let's not plant trees until this fall because we're going into the worst time of year to plant them. So we'd like to increase the tree canopy cover to 25 to 35% or higher. This is a neighborhood, a low-income neighborhood with a high incidence of poverty, 99 percentile, incidence of asthma and cardiovascular diseases very high, high ozone pollution percentile, and also nearly void of almost no trees here at all. So the tree canopy cover is far less than the desired 25 or 30%. In fact, it's below 10%. Compare that with a neighborhood up in San Mateo County in Atherton, just the opposite. Healthier environment, the poverty incidence is 2 percentile. You can see all the goldenrod color, that's 30, 35, in some cases 40% tree canopy cover. So let's help the documented benefits of enhancing tree canopies, help those vulnerable communities most in need. Here's another take-home message. Yes, we need to plant trees, but only as many as we can properly maintain. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the plant disorders that we see are due to abiotic, which means, of course, non-living conditions that are completely preventable. These are just cases that I took, some up in Santa Barbara, the bottom right one, in my neighborhood in Palm Springs. All these cases were human-induced tragedies. They should have all been prevented. I know the Mardi Gras tree, it's cute, you know, especially certain celebration times of the year for Halloween. They hang baskets on it. People love it, but they also have a lot of nails that are destroying the vascular system of that tree that you can't really see in that picture. So these are instances where when you think about cooling urban heat islands, not only proper selected species for that climate zone, but also properly maintained trees over the long run are extremely important. Due to all this poor selection and care, we have an average lifespan reduction of 50 to 70% of our urban trees. And this includes professionally maintained street trees, as you see in the center, because these were ficus. They've been severely root pruned, shouldn't have been root pruned, should have been planted in a space and a place that would accommodate, at least 3,500 cubic feet of underground space for a massively large root system at maturity of this ficus tree. On the left, I was actually doing I think it was a arboriculture lecture, and right outside my house, I heard a chainsaw starting up, and this was going on right when I was talking about the importance of not topping trees. And then on the right, just something that as we walk our neighborhoods, you see your neighbors out. If you notice that they've neglected or probably haven't thought about the danger or just haven't even noticed, that they still have really tightly staked and cutting into the cambium wrapped around. Either it could be wire, rubber, or other kinds of pruning tape. Make sure that that's loosened as well. Another take-home message is that the length of time it takes to replant trees and to regain the lost benefits of poorly selected and maintained trees impacts the future generation, and it's really too high of a price to pay. I think the reality hit for me about 5.5 years ago when my grandson, who's pictured here, was born. And it almost brings tears to my eyes now when I think about what are we leaving our children and our children's children. This is really, really important. The trees that we're planting now, hopefully in 40 and 50 years, will be legacy trees by which our family, our neighbors' families can remember what our generation did for them by. So I wanted just to go over a few very simple, inexpensive, and impactful ways that you can remind the public to take care of their trees during drought and water restrictions. I also have a whole half-hour presentation on this topic that I've already taped, and it's recorded and stored. I'm happy to, I'll probably put that up on the presentation page from today's field day. First of all, we want to use water wisely. For mature trees, it's important to remind our friends as well as general members of the public that you as master gardeners educate and provide information for, that watering the tree trunks not only does no good, but it's wasting water, and it could result in, even during a drought, fight off the root and crown rots, because the water's not taken up, of course, by the trunk. It's taken up by the roots. So even just dragging a hose out halfway between the drip line and the trunk, and even beyond that drip line if you can, and watering deeply, just a trickle drip with the hose or a soaker hose can keep these trees alive during the summer. And if you look at the bottom graph, this is just something you've all seen before, but it's just to remind us, to remind the public, that well over 80% of the water needs throughout California, any location in California, are actually during spring and summer. So of course, when you look at that, the green bar, that's out in the desert, and that's significantly higher than along the coast, but you still see that bell curve where about 80% of the water for any given urban area in the state of California is in spring and summer. And in a real ideal situation, we would water trees separately from the turf. That's not possible for a lot of entities that either are reined in because they don't have the budget or the management that is able to hire people to go ahead and change the equipment, replace sprinkler systems that were irrigating ultimately the trees, but they were set up for the turf to then be more efficient drip systems. In a lot of cases, there's either tight money, the purse strap is tied too tightly, or there's just lack of knowledge or other reasons that this isn't done. So mature trees, they do prefer to be watered much less often, but much longer than more shallowly rooted plants such as our ground covers and lawns. So I mentioned the importance of just a few deep waterings in spring and summer. We found through our research that most mature trees can be kept alive just with a few deep soakers that might only be once or twice a month. Early morning is best. Just a trickle drip. Soaker hoses are great. They're pretty inexpensive. Whether you use a regular garden hose or a soaker hose, remember you should have an anti-siphon or a backflow device that's off of the bib that then is going to be screwed into the garden hose and then the soaker hose. And what's so important is that soil type is very influential on how often that these plants should be watered. So it's not just the amount of water that's applied, but if somebody calls you and says, you know, how many gallons a week does my mature oak tree need just to survive the drought, then sure, that's important to talk to them about the amount, but you want to make sure that the way they're watering doesn't result in runoff. Amir's going to talk about compaction and its relationship to infiltration. Is the water even getting in the soil? The heavier the soil is, usually it's because there's a larger percent of clay, then you would need to water at an even less pace. You would need to have a slower infiltration rate, but water with a hose maybe an hour or two longer. And in a sandy situation, then you have to make sure that that you don't run the water so fast that it completely drives itself through the root system and below where it can be absorbed through the roots and below where it's useful. We had a study with mulch that indicated that roots under mulch do tend to be shallower, and with fire-prone landscaping, we don't necessarily want to use a lot of organic mulch. So the only take-home message is that mulch, whether it's inorganic or organic, can help to reduce evaporation from the soil by keeping the water in, but it's probably not as simple as we used to think. There's also some disadvantage to use of mulch. The last picture is down the street from my house, where I hope it helps you to remind people that if in times of drought, when people are maybe going for the $2, you know, a square foot rebate to remove their turf, that any tree that was reliant on that irrigation system, the sprinkler system used to water the lawn, is then gone, and those trees are going to be void of water unless there's some kind of system or some way they can still get water. So the picture on the left actually shows the neighbor's yard, and there's turf there. And the picture on the right is a vacant lot, and that mesquite tree has been kept entirely alive because it's still receiving water from the lawn that is shown on the left on the bottom. And then no pruning unless absolutely necessary during the drought. You can see a proper pruning on the top where you have a callus form, and improper pruning on the bottom. We talked about removing any kind of girdling pruning ties that cut into the vascular system of the trees. We want to cut back and not fertilize trees at all, because that enhances growth and then also increases the need for even more water. So if we have fruit trees, well, that's okay. Don't fertilize them, because you want to save the tree, even if that means that you have another season with low or maybe no production at all. I'll be talking later about our climate ready landscape tree study. We have 12 species at the Riverside and the Irvine plots. They haven't had water since March 2020. This is a collaborative study with the U.S. Forest Service and several of my A&R colleagues. And these are some trees that currently represent less than 1% of the street tree species. So that's how they're looking as of May 15th. They're doing great. And I'll also talk later today about why we selected those species, and I'll go over exactly what they are and some avenues for you to help the public search and seek out not only these species, but other heat, drought, and pest-resistant species. So I know you're all doing a lot out there. We've got a project with the San Bernardino County Master Gardeners called Trees for Tomorrow Start Today. It's a grant with the Inland Empire Resource Conservation District, California Climate Action Corps, and several other nonprofits. We've got over 600 trees in the ground in inner city vulnerable neighborhoods. It's been a very successful project, and this is something that I know is one of probably 20 examples that I hope that you'll share this afternoon in peer-to-peer. We also have a plethora of University of California drought-related resources that I wanted to make sure you are aware of. Here's a list of them. They're all free. They're all on the A&R website. And then there's numerous blogs that can be downloaded from the California Institute for Water Resources. I have a monthly blog. Maggie has one. A lot of the other advisors have climate smart blogs, and a lot of them are drilling down to best practices under drought. So I thank you for your time.